Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the next installment of Spinnakers on-demand webinar series on organizational change management. This morning, we will be talking in particular about training and organizational enablement, or as many individuals refer to it as knowledge transfer. Just a little bit about myself for those of you that might be listening to one of these webinars for the first time. My name is Mark Smith. I am a director in Spinnakers JDA supply chain practice with roughly 20 years of experience in the supply chain field, running from implementations of JDA and SAP to supply chain strategy, to roadmaps, to assessments, training, pretty much the full gambit when it comes to supply chain work, applications, and projects across the full spectrum of various industries, from retail and consumer goods all the way through to automotive and manufacturing. And as you will note here from the slide, some of my notable client implementations and work over the past 20 years or so.
So with that said, I want to first take you into Spinnaker's overall organizational change management framework. And with any type of transformation, as you can see here from this particular slide, change is composed of many different things. Whether we were talking about what is leadership saying and doing around this change, how are you aligning your resources, how might skills change based upon any type of transformation which your organization is implementing, and what is the vision of that change? How are you going to guide that elevator pitch throughout the organization and align that vision across different groups? So if you think of change management as these various different components, from vision all the way through to leadership, in order for any truly project, whether you're talking supply chain or any type of human resources or financial, this is not limited purely to supply chain type work. In order for any type of implementation or business process or strategic work to be successful, change management is a key component, and all 6 of these areas from vision to leadership are key. If you have a situation where the work that you are doing, leadership is not aligned, or there is a lack of vision, or there may be the potential where you have not laid out a sound plan, or your resources are not aligned, all of these can lead to issues of confusion as to what you may want to be doing with the transformation you're instituting, lead to frustration for your resources, or it leads to a much slower and more gradual change throughout the organization. So in order to really be successful with any type of transformation, you need to ensure that from a change management perspective, you are touching upon all 6 of these areas from vision to leadership. And as such, that is really where organizational alignment and readiness come into play. Now, from a Spinnaker perspective, we envision organizational change management as being a key overlay over Spinnaker's 5 lenses implementation methodology. So Spinnaker's implementation methodology, the 5 lenses, are composed of people, process, technology, policies, and metrics. And as you can see, just as with many other implementation methodologies, we actually cover off from an overall programmatic perspective, from assess all the way through to manage, or as other organizations may call it, cut over and go live, depending on the work that is being done. But overlaying that from both a programmatic perspective, how are you running the program, Spinnaker's methodology also overlays the organizational change management component, as you can see at the bottom of the graphic on the slide here. Change management is something that is key, that needs to be discussed and addressed throughout all phases of a project implementation. This morning, going into a bit more detail, if we take Spinnaker's 5 lenses approach to its implementation methodology and delve further into that organizational change management component, you can see on this slide that Spinnaker's implementation methodology is composed of 4 specific components on the OCM front: organizational alignment and readiness, organizational design, training and organizational enablement, and communication. Each of these can be done individually as a specific aspect of change management, or if it is a large project or implementation, taken together holistically. And within each of these 4 OCM components, there are different work plans or activities, tools and templates, deliverables and metrics that we have in place to help guide an organization through that overall change management process in association with any transformation work that you may be doing. If we look at it from a more higher level view, really, if it is a very large scale implementation, typically speaking, you're looking at developing a sound OCM strategy first. So what is that strategy and the scope and objectives associated with your OCM work? And then you use that to drive down into how you're going to do your alignment, design, training, and communication. So it's very similar to what I was discussing previously on the prior slide, where from an OCM strategic perspective, you need to ensure that that strategy and that vision are in place, and then use that strategy and vision and the associated scope and objectives to then drive the individual 4 components within Spinnaker's organizational change management framework. Our framework is composed of the 4 components. So as I have previously mentioned,
today we will be focusing purely on training and organizational enablement and the importance of having a sound training approach with any type of supply chain transformation you may be undertaking. So with that, I will jump directly into training and organizational enablement. Now, what is training? A lot of companies claim that they may have some type of training program, or they have materials available, whatever it may be. But when you really get down to it, training is about ensuring your employees are well versed in the skills that they need to succeed in their role. And having those skills really helps reduce the risk that your workplace faces, helps improve the overall performance of your employees, and really helps you drive successful implementations and transformations. Generally speaking, as you may have heard in some previous webinars, frequently OCM or organizational change management, which training is a component of, is an afterthought. And because of that, many implementations, whether it is a software implementation or a business process initiative that you may be undertaking, while the train rails are fine and the locomotive is moving down the track fine, when you actually get time to move to cutover and adoption, this is where you start facing challenges because you have not necessarily developed a sound training approach for use within your organization. So this is really why training and organizational enablement is one of the key components within Spinnaker's OCM framework. As you can see on the slide, the 3rd component that we've called out within our organizational change management strategy. Now, within Spinnaker, we have developed 4 unique offerings when it comes to training. And the crux of the webinar today will really go into quite a bit more detail around each of these different levels of training, as well as the approach and a highlight of some of the potential deliverables that would come with any of these proposed training levels that we do offer. The first level of training, level 1, is really what you could consider that basic application training. It is where we are working with your end users to take them and guide them through the basic functionality of a particular application. Whereas if you juxtapose that to level 2 and a more task level training, this really builds upon pure application and understanding what the application does, and incorporates business process aspects and looks at work activities from a daily, weekly, or monthly perspective. So this is really stepping it up a level as far as training is concerned. If we were to look at the most detailed levels of training, that would be level 3 and 4. And this is where, from a level 3 perspective, we are looking at not only the business processes associated with this particular application, but we are also looking and considering the downstream and upstream impacts. So what might be some of the inputs or outputs that this process needs to connect with, or this application needs to connect with. And it also brings in more leading practice type information from external supply chain concepts. So based upon other work that Spinnaker has done or other leading practices within the industry, we will bring that knowledge to the table as well with a level 3 training approach. Level 4 training is really where we get to the most comprehensive view. You can consider it more of a 360-degree training program, in the sense that not only do we take the end users through the application, through the business process, through the day in the life, we incorporate that upstream and downstream and what those inputs and outputs may look like, and actually segment it to casual users versus potential super users. But we're also looking at it from an overall competency perspective. So going in and doing a skills assessment of the organization to determine where there may be gaps or where there may not be gaps, and in turn using that assessment to help drive in quite a bit of detail what that ultimate training program looks like. And then once the training is actually delivered, assessing the skills of the newly trained users, and do they comprehend what was taught to them around an application perspective? Are there gaps with some of the processes that we trained on that we need to refocus upon? So level 4 is really about doing that assessment work up front, as well as those pre and post proficiency assessments, and really building some type of workflow audit where we are continually working with you to assess how your end users are using the system and whether refresher training may be required. Now, for the overall training offerings, as you can note here on this particular slide, really if you're looking at the level 1 training from a prerequisites perspective, there is really no need to have any type of understanding of the application or the processes that your organization may be being trained on. When we start moving up to level 2, 3, and 4, that is then where there are prerequisites required. So in particular, as I mentioned on the previous slide, when we get to level 2, we are beginning to incorporate business process. So as such, we would need the ability to understand what are your day or week in the life type processes, so that that information could be incorporated into the overall training material. When we get to level 3 and the level 4, that steps up even a bit more as far as prerequisites are concerned. And this is where, from a RACI perspective, we really want to understand who does what in the organization, which individuals are responsible for which activities, so that we can ensure that from an overall training perspective, we are highlighting whether marketing and sales should receive some type of rudimentary overview training. This is the new supply chain system coming out. This is how it may impact you from a sales or marketing perspective, versus if we have the detailed organizational charts or RACIs within the supply chain group and what your inventory planners do versus your demand planners, or let's say you're a retail organization and you have merchants or other planners. That may then necessitate a different training approach if we were to go to level 3 or level 4. And then lastly, a prerequisite for the level 3 and level 4 is really focused on what are your standard operating procedures, because those are also key to help formulate and to really create more customized training materials that are beneficial for your organization. Now, as it's called out underneath there, from a standard operating procedure perspective, that is where we're really talking about creating potential page or screenshots of what the system or the processes may look like. We are creating an implementation design document, and we are building in those business and process flows into the overall workflow documentation that we would develop as part of the training material. Now, going into a bit more detail here to look at it as to when different types of training or the different levels of Spinnaker training may be beneficial for your organization. We've tried to categorize this based upon where you may be in a particular life cycle of the project that your organization may be working upon. So if you are at a potential vendor selection and you really want to understand what different applications can do, so if you are doing, let's say, a bake-off between SAP and JDA and Oracle from a supply chain planning perspective, would you want your end users to have some basic or rudimentary training as to what each of those applications do? Thereby, this level 1 training could be a good fit for those situations where Spinnaker could come in and provide an overview of when somebody says DFU, what does DFU mean in the JDA world, and what is the equivalent terminology in the SAP or Oracle world. That way, when the actual vendors are coming in to do this bake-off or to present their response to, let's assume you've created an RFP, that your core team understands these key concepts and can come up with challenging questions and questions based upon fact with what they have been trained on from the training provided by Spinnaker. Level 2 training is, from a best fit perspective, really focused upon more around you are getting to that phase in the project and you want some casual users or maybe some more focused users that will be involved in UAT, user acceptance testing, to really be prepared. So we are using level 2 trainings to take them through not only that application training, but that business process training. Because typically speaking, when you are involved in UAT, end users are going through business process flow activities within the applications, and knowing what that looks like up front and having been trained on it, it helps them execute UAT more successfully. The level 3 and level 4, from a best fit perspective, level 3 is typically for an organization where you may be going through some type of major upgrade. So for instance, recently there was an organization moving from JDA version 8.x up to 2016. So a significant jump with quite a few enhancements built in over the past many years. So this is where level 3 really comes into play, where we can reinforce what they may already know or re-engage with them on topics that your end users think they may know, but also focus upon what those deltas are between that previous release and the more current release that you will be upgrading to. It is also very good, level 3, from a global footprint perspective. So if you are a global organization where you are doing some type of phased rollout across your geographic regions, level 3 and level 4 are both very opportune training programs that you could use to ensure that as you roll out globally, that you are attacking the right topics and tailoring the needs to each of your global audiences. And then I would say most importantly, with any type of implementation, whether it is an upgrade or a new implementation, level 3 and 4 are really the levels that most organizations should consider, because it does provide that super user and end user training. Typically speaking, when you are going about any type of application implementation, you do have your end users that will be doing your demand planning or your fulfillment planning, reviewing your fulfillment plans and how they feed to the manufacturing side of your house, or if you're a retailer, how your fulfillment plans may interact with your buyers and the merchant plans that are being put together. So with a level 3 and level 4, we have the ability to segregate out what types of training all of these different groups would obtain. So whether that's creating a more casual user training approach versus a more focused user training approach versus a super user versus a technical. These are all different types of training considerations that can come into play based on the users that need to be trained. And likewise, as I mentioned, with the level 4, that is where we really incorporate the overall assessment aspects and work with you to assess after the training how folks have grasped and are understanding the subject matter that has been taught to them. If you want to think about this a little bit differently with the level 3 and level 4, you can almost consider this as if you think back to university and whatever your degree may have been in, you had a particular curricula that you had to follow in order to make sure that you achieved your degree. A level 3, level 4 can take a similar approach. So if it is somebody, for instance, if we were to put it in college degree terms, somebody receiving an associate's degree versus a bachelor's versus a master's or a PhD, in this approach, curricula could be developed where we would say anyone with pursuing an associate's type level of work may only have to be instructed on 2 courses, an understanding of key terminology, for instance, and some basic navigation within the system. If you're speaking somebody from a PhD, i.e. a potential super user, then that may be a curricula where they not only get that AA, that associate degrees training, but they also get the additional levels of training associated with that, so that they are well-versed and are really that doctor or that expert in the area within your organization. Now, looking at this particular slide, the best way to sum this up is really training is about a continuum. Whether you start at the most basic end-user task-focused training with the level 1, if you want your organization to evolve and to continue to grow, it is about ensuring that as you move along this continuum, that you are focused upon that overall organizational enablement. You are focused on emphasizing the role that business processes play within the training and play within the everyday work activities of your end users. So moving from a more agnostic approach to training with that level 1 to really making it a continuous feedback loop at that level 4 or that 360-degree level of training. If we were to look at the training levels a bit differently again, I think these bullseye graphics sum it up pretty well. Level 1, as I mentioned, really being about that application training. There's a little bit of strategy involved. There's a little bit of execution, not much, and it's really just focused on the application itself. You can see as we progress through the different levels of training, we continue to enhance what they are getting and how they are getting it, and really applying it to their day in and day out work activities. So by the time we get to a level 3, it's really about how or what does a super user do versus a casual user versus a technical user, versus when you get to that level 4, how do I ensure that my users have been well trained? How do I ensure that we are receiving the feedback in order to make updates or changes to the training materials and or provide that feedback to the individuals that have been trained if we are seeing a gap in their current skills. Now, touching upon some of the key benefits associated with training, each level really does offer differing benefits, and you can probably gather by now that if you do truly want a more comprehensive, more benefit-driven approach to training, that would definitely be the level 3, level 4. Focusing first upon level 1, application training, really that's about enabling the project team and helping to support any design sessions you may be doing. So if you're looking at this from a project lifecycle perspective, typically level 1 type training is going to occur at the beginning of any design work that you may be doing, so that as your end user are walking into these design workshops, they actually have a rudimentary knowledge up to the system, and they can design much better business processes to drive what your future state may look like. Level 2 training, on the other hand, with task training, is really focused upon what that business workflow is going to be like, and it's more specific to your configuration needs. So level 1 is very basic. This is what the system does. Level 2 takes it to that slightly higher level of this is how your business process would interact with it, and that's where really from a benefits perspective, we're tying the application to what that business process should be. Level 3 then builds upon the benefits associated with both level 1 and level 2. And this is really where, from a benefits perspective, we start segregating out the different types of users and what they are trained on. This is really about ensuring that everyone in your organization, no matter their role, they fully understand the activities associated with their role, and they are able to execute on those activities. And then the last level of training there, from a benefits perspective, level 4, as I've mentioned previously, is around those assessments. And many organizations, excuse me, following those training sessions, want to have some type of certification program. This program typically is some type of skills assessment / exam, which Spinnaker will administer, so that we can identify immediately end users that have grasped and understood what the training is about, how they will be using this application and these business processes in their day-to-day roles. And it allows us to work with appropriate groups internally to help focus where we need to potentially do some remedial training for a certain group, or maybe where training didn't hit the mark and we need to consider how we repurpose that particular training course, or how we may want to adjust some of the verbiage or some of the examples. So level 4 allows us the ability to really help drive towards the development of a world-class organization. Now, on the next slide here, up to this point, I've been speaking about training, the different levels of training which Spinnaker offers. And I think it's important to understand that Spinnaker will be applying its implementation methodology known as the 5 lenses. And when it comes to training, training is about not only your people, processes, and technology, but it's also about the policies and the metrics. So from a people perspective, when we are developing the training materials and working with you to figure out what is the right level of training that your organization needs, within the people environment, it's really identifying how we are going to evolve the organization so that we are moving from, in many times, some type of firefighting capacity to a management by exception. So what kind of training materials would we need to develop or refine to ensure that from a people perspective and empowering the individuals, that we get them away from that, I just have to come in and put out fires today, to I'm actually going to start planning for the future. If we look at it from a process perspective, really, Spinnaker, when we apply our 5 lenses approach to the training environment, is about how do we ensure that you're developing sound business processes that support the application or the business processes that you may be changing or modifying. And in turn, how do we ensure that the workflow is aligned between these business processes and the application that is being implemented. From a technology perspective, this is really where, from a training perspective, many organizations honestly do forget to provide an adequate level of training on the technology side. So how do we provide a best fit training approach such your technology specialist or your help desk have the right skills and understand what needs to happen, whether there's a failure in the batch process or whether there's a call into the help desk around my forecast doesn't look right. So this is where, from a technology perspective, we work with you to develop sound and appropriate training modules which really help drive the overall training approach throughout your technology organization as well. On the policies and metrics side, whenever there's any type of business process change or systems change, there needs to be a review and or a validation of metrics used to reward individuals, metrics used to measure the success of the organization or the organization's corporate goals. So again, when Spinnaker is working with you to develop the appropriate levels of training, and assuming this is a level 3 or level 4 type training approach, we are also bringing our 5 lenses approach to ensure that from an overall policies perspective or metrics perspective, there are not things in conflict between what we would like to do with training in this new application and these new business processes versus what or how individuals within your organization are going to be measured. A key component to all of the training materials which Spinnaker develops is really focused on adult learning theory. And adult learning theory is a framework where roles and responsibilities are clearly defined. There is a core competency model, so to speak. And as part of that core competency model, we are focused upon trying to flush out what is that tribal knowledge or what is that know-how. What does Tommy have in his head that he has been doing for 5-10 years now that he just feels he needs to always do because nobody does it, but he's never discussed it with anyone to bring that into some type of business process flow or to determine if that is functionality that now exists in the application that is being used. So looking at it a different way, it's really about identifying where those gaps are or where that dysfunctional thinking may be occurring, as in this is the way I've done it all my life and I've done it for 35 years and I'll keep doing it for the next 15 years because that's the way I do it. So adult learning theory coupled with the accelerated organization performance really focuses on that core competency to ensure that we're identifying where those gaps are, driving towards ensuring that that knowledge that runs throughout the hundreds of years of experience across your various employees, all of that is brought into the fold from an overall training development perspective. AOP, or Accelerating Organization Performance, is also focused upon creating a training approach where there is the ability to have continuous sustainable change. It's really focused upon addressing issues and making trade-offs around decisions, knowing that not any particular application or business process is going to solve every issue within your organization, but figuring out where we need to make those trade-offs, and we focus on that 80-20 rule. It also helps drive an overall change in thinking within the teams, that you are focused upon moving towards a culture of performance, one where everybody understands what their personal measurements are and what they need to do in order to really help the organization achieve that end game. And for me personally, I would say that the key area associated with adult learning theory and AOP is around the silo mentality. How do we break down those silos? So again, if I look at Tommy, and Tommy has done this for 30, 35 years, how do we break down that silo around Tommy to ensure that we are bringing that into what we are trying to achieve with the new application or processes that we are implementing? That is really the core of what adult learning theory is about. People sit at the center of adult learning theory, and then from an overall implementation perspective, this is where Spinnaker is focused upon. How do we ensure we're aligning and making sure your organization is ready? And for those of you that have previously listened, one of the first webinars was around organizational alignment and readiness. Another key aspect to adult learning theory is that user adoption and readiness. So how do we measure that they are actually using, performing well, and continuing to evolve with the use of the application? So going in and doing those assessments and assessing the overall readiness of the organization to continue growing and evolving. And then likewise, from an overall role-based skills evaluation, that ties in very nicely from a user adoption, as does examining role responsibility and definition. Really, it cannot be said enough that as within any training environment, particularly when you are implementing a level 3 or level 4, there has to be a holistic view as to not only are we developing world-class training materials, but we need to understand the overall change management component, and in turn the organizational alignment, which then ties to how do we need to assess individuals' roles and whether these roles need to be reevaluated? Does this particular role need to be split in two now? Do we need to create new roles? So these are all different activities that, built in as part of adult learning theory, Spinnaker would work with you to develop as part of your training module, depending on which level you actually choose to implement. Now, from a core competency perspective, you can see at the base of the pyramid here, we have the adult learning theory. And really, what sums it up best is the quote from Charles Darwin. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but rather the one most adaptable to change. And really, this is where Spinnaker's 5 lenses applies this willingness to change across people, process, technology, metrics, and KPIs, and helps build world-class training materials for your organization. It's about building specific information, specific training materials to your audience, to their roles, and ensuring that fits into their roles and responsibilities. It's also about ensuring that we are driving the right level of adoption and the right level of participation so that we are seeing the positive impacts of the bottom line. If we look at it from a pyramid perspective, really from a business process view, it is how are we going to ensure that there are standard operating procedures in place? What does that look like? Do you have them in place, or do we need to develop them? If we look at it from a functional skills and knowledge perspective, do we have the necessary day-in-the-life training materials, or the hands-on exercises, or the supporting navigation training materials to make sure that users know how to move around the system and they are tested on their ability to move around the system? And then the other key component being conceptual understanding. What is that foundational knowledge? What are the additional critical strategic or thinking skills that individuals need to be trained on? Do they need to have some additional supply chain acumen imbued into their knowledge of how the world works today or how supply chain has evolved? So from a core competency perspective, Spinnaker uses its 5 lenses to really push across people, process, technology, KPIs, and metrics into achieving process excellence, functional skills and knowledge excellence, and ensuring that your end users have a very good conceptual understanding of the applications that they will be using. If you want to think about this differently, a few years ago I was involved in a very large retail implementation where, at least from an application perspective, business requirements, business process, the core team was completely bought in. And we felt we had successfully aligned the organization. The organization being demand planners, inventory planners, merchants. They had a separate buyers group. So from our perspective, we had done everything right. However, once the training was executed and the individual skills were assessed, it became clear that, at least from a buyer and merchant perspective, they had not grasped what these changes were or how these changes were going to impact what they needed to do in their day-to-day jobs, and they began to slip back into their old routines. So from a core competency perspective with Spinnaker, by applying the 5 lenses, we're ensuring that we're looking at all 5 components holistically. We're applying adult learning theory, and based upon the training levels that you have chosen to have created for your organization, ensuring that we are working with the right users and potentially assessing what they are doing and doing remedial training where necessary based upon those assessments. Now, from a industry perspective, I know there are many organizations that feel that their industry or their business is quite unique, and that any type of training program that has to be developed really has to go down to the 99-1 rule, as I like to call it, where we're supposed to cover off in everything from a business process or application perspective. But it's important to note that with Spinnaker's vast range of experience across CPG and retail and manufacturing, and our working relationships with various trade groups, as well as the certifications which many of our consultants have, it's more important that Spinnaker or any consulting organization that you may use, that we bring that fundamental knowledge of what's going on in the industry. We bring the knowledge as to what may be going on from an APICS perspective, or if you work with supply chain insights, or whether you get your information from Gartner, whatever the case may be, that we're ensuring that we are bringing that necessary information to the table. That is where really I would say Spinnaker helps achieve successful training programs for organizations. And as part of that, it also entails bringing a catalog of industry-related operating metrics, or KPIs. Having worked with such a varied amount of industries and organizations over the years, we can readily say that, typically speaking, from a demand planning perspective, if you're at this particular level of a hierarchy, this is what you should be seeing from a forecast accuracy perspective. Based upon that, your organization is not performing well. And likewise, I would say that the other component that really ties it all together is having that thought leadership, or that industry vision. And Spinnaker, working with such organizations as Gartner and others, really we have that insight as to what's going on, so that when we are coming into your organization to begin building any training materials, we can sit down with you and say, listen, there's this new technology that's been out for about 1.5 years. Based upon what we've learned to date, this is something you really need to consider, and this is how we might go about training you on it. So while Spinnaker brings the industry experience, the relationships with various external groups, we also have to bring our business process expertise. In order for any training at the level 2 through level 4 to be successful, we have to be able to apply appropriate levels of business process work. Because if we don't do that, typically what happens is you implement the application, everyone will just say, well, the application isn't doing what it's supposed to do, or I'm not getting the benefits that I thought I would get. So bringing this business process expertise is key. And as part of that, it's really about aligning application usage to your operational goals or to your KPIs. So tying those new business processes and ensuring those operational goals and KPIs match to what those business processes should be, and then using all of that in turn to tie back to the development of the associated training programs. Also, from a business process expertise perspective, Spinnaker brings the ability to understand, as I mentioned previously, what's going on across various businesses or various industries. What are some scenarios that other groups have faced that may be pertinent to some of the work that you're currently doing within your organization? Also understanding what is going on from complementary business solutions. So to me, a very pertinent one on this front is around master data management. Everybody, no matter what supply chain system you may have implemented, master data quality is almost always a problem. And because most supply chain systems are a planning system and hence not an ERP system or a master system that is responsible for maintaining master data components, master data attributes, again, lots of times you will hear end users saying, well, this isn't working or this is garbage. Invariably, at times when you dig into this, it is related to master data or a lack of a master data governance structure within an organization. So Spinnaker has the ability to bring our knowledge of master data tools that exist in the marketplace, that we can ensure that as you go about implementing the application and then training on these applications and business processes, that we are ensuring that your organization is putting its best foot forward and the investment you're making in the application is not being hindered by something such as master data. I would say another key area from a subject matter expertise is on the business process front. And the one I would like to highlight here is particularly around NPI, or new product introduction. Invariably, this is a problem no matter what industry you are in or how long you have been in business. NPI and how you go about planning for it is always problematic. So having done many different implementations over the years across a spectrum of applications, having the ability for Spinnaker to come in and say, from a training perspective, we think the NPI materials need to be slightly different. Here's the rationale why, and here's how we would like to develop them with you. And then the last few areas around subject matter expertise, focusing upon day-in-the-life activities. So being able to clearly delineate with your end users that typically this is what you'd be doing on a daily basis versus a weekly or a monthly basis. And then using that to help you establish leading practices within your organization. So as you can see from an overall industry knowledge perspective and business process perspective, Spinnaker would bring those skill sets to bear on any type of training initiative that we would be working on with you and your organization. The last key area where Spinnaker would bring the appropriate level of knowledge base is really on the application front. So many training programs will focus more upon let's call it the rudimentary navigation of the application or a rudimentary understanding of key tables. Spinnaker brings to the table, when we are developing the training materials, really an in-depth knowledge of the underlying tables, or if you're thinking from a demand planning perspective, the algorithms and the various parameters that control those algorithms, and in turn how those algorithms and parameters impact your forecast. So if we were to apply this to a level 3 or level 4 type training, from a super user perspective, there is the potential to develop a very specific training program that focuses purely on the algorithms and which are the most pertinent parameters to control the algorithms and how they impact your overall forecast. Another area is really understanding what functionality is relevant and you should be trained on and what you should not be trained on. So again, if I go to the super user example, if we are focused on a level 3 or level 4 type training approach, it is knowing that perhaps we can develop the same training materials for everybody, and we go up through, let's just say, chapter 4 of every single course. But when we get to chapter 5, 6, and 7 may move into the advanced topics, and that is where it becomes a super user training session. So again, understanding where we differentiate between which individuals receive which types of training and where we should make that delineation and ensure that as an organization, you know, okay, we're going to develop a holistic demand training approach to this training, but we need to differentiate between your core users and your super users. The last area around application knowledge, and I've touched upon this a bit, is really understanding the core components, the core tables, how everything is connected behind the scenes, knowing that when we are talking about a DRP coverage duration, that we know what we're speaking of, or being able to discuss safety stock versus statistical safety stock, and what the difference is and why you may want to use statistical safety stock versus standard safety stock. These are all the types of things and the knowledge that Spinnaker brings to the table as we are working with you to develop the training materials. Now, I've already hit upon some of the benefits associated with the different levels of training, but in this particular slide, I'd like to touch upon some of the benefits associated by various deliverables. So from an overall end user skill assessment, it's really the key activity is focused upon what what am I doing in my day-to-day activities, and we basically assess what they're doing, how they are doing it, how they are performing, which that then leads to our ability to identify where those skill gaps exist, how we may need to work with you and your organization to align differently or to evolve the alignment within the organization, which may then lead to a discussion around how jobs or roles are impacted or need to change and evolve. If we look at benefits from a training methods perspective and effectiveness, this is really focused upon what type of curricula should we be focused upon. So again, we can look at it from, we are going to develop that overall assessment of what is currently working within your organization, and then developing the appropriate strategies to address how we need to improve upon any of the gaps associated with that assessment. With training curriculum and development design, this is really taking it to that next level where we are developing the training materials based on your specific business needs, and the key benefit really being around it is training materials that are developed based upon your individual processes. It is not about what your competitor may be doing or what is going on in the industry in general, but it is based upon the requirements within your organization. And then if we move to where we're actually executing on the training, we've developed the training materials, we're executing on those training materials, so we're standing in front of the room delivering the courses. The key benefits associated with that is because we have done this numerous times over the years and across the industries, we can bring real live examples into those training initiatives, into those discussions, where we can ensure that from an overall transformation perspective, you are going to be well placed for your rollover and go live situation that would be coming up. All right, so what I would like to discuss now is the training engagement model. And this really goes into a bit more detail around the different types of training, some of the features associated with each of the levels of the training, as well as the overall expected scope. So delving into the level 1 application training. This is, as I've mentioned previously, where experienced consultants, we are coming in and we are basically teaching you agnostically what the application does. There is nothing around business processes or day in the life or any type of super user, casual user training. It's really what the application does. So from a features perspective, typically this is focused upon your implementation team, or if you're going through a re-implementation, and focused on the navigation of the application, and if there are any specific aspects of the application that you may be using currently, if it's re-implementation, or specific aspects that you want to be aware of. For instance, if you're doing that RFP and your vendors may be coming in to do an RFP presentation to you. The content is typically just example screenshots. There's the key pages that you may be using from the application, and it is focused upon a more of a short-term overall implementation approach. Usually we're looking at roughly 16 hours in the classroom per application, per resource. From a scope and duration perspective, as I discussed previously, because this is a level 1, it is usually a 4-week engagement. And as you can see there, from an overall engagement perspective, we are talking about an overall kickoff, content development, delivery of that training, and then an overall project wrap-up. Moving into level 2, the overall engagement approach is really about that week in the life or day in the life approach to the application and to the training materials. In this particular level, your end users need to be able to efficiently use the application in their business processes. It's not only about knowing how to navigate or where to navigate, but knowing how this ties back to business process and hence the week in the life view of the world. It is It goes beyond the typical screenshot to where business process examples are being incorporated into the training materials. And just as importantly, we move beyond that agnostic view of the world, and incorporation of your terminology is brought in. So whether you are a retailer or an apparel company or a manufacturer or automotive, we are using your industry lingo and or your organization's lingo in the development of the training materials with the supporting screenshots and business process examples. Because we are bringing in that business process and that more detailed focus upon your organization and industry, typically this is 20 hours of training per module, per resource within your organization. And as such, the overall engagement period extends by 1 week because the development of the content now takes roughly 2 weeks, weeks 2 and 3, followed by overall delivery and project wrap up. As noted on this slide here, there can be an exam offered as well, and that is an add-on to any to the typical level 2 work that would be conducted on your behalf. Level 3 training is where we really start getting into that best-in-class supply chain training and developing that best-in-class supply chain planning workforce. It is about having a comprehensive program that really emphasizes continuous learning both internally as well as bringing in external concepts into the training programs that are developed. So understanding what are some of the other technologies out there, understanding where Gartner or other industry leaders think supply chain management may be going and how that may impact what is being implemented here 3 or 4 years down the road. From a features perspective, this level 3 and level 4 are really about ensuring the individuals in your organization, they need to have a very solid competency and proficiency in your supply chain management processes and applications. It is really focused upon that entire end-to-end business process flow, including the upstream and the downstream. It's just not within the business process flows within the four-wall confines of the application that you're using, but what does it mean for upstream and downstream and how this may connect with an ERP system, how it may connect with a vendor or a supplier or a customer that you're sharing information with. All of these different types of components are brought into the training materials developed for level 3. Likewise, because there is that upstream and downstream view, from a content perspective, it is significantly focused upon customer or your business examples and your terminology, and includes developing exercises, hands-on exercises that are specific to you, and it is all of your data that is potentially being used, which is also additional add-on if you want a customized training database. Again, because we have stepped it up another level, typically this training is 24 hours of training per application, per resource again. And as you can see, again, from an overall implementation perspective or duration, weeks 1 is again about kickoff, week 2 going into requirements gathering, and really now we have moved into 3 full weeks of content development, and then 2 full weeks of training delivery, followed by an overall exam and project wrap up. Level 4 training, 360-degree, is really taking it to that next level. Unless planners are well-versed in systems and processes, level 3 and level 4 really needs to be where training is focused to ensure that an organization is achieving the most optimal benefits from the applications or the business processes being implemented. It takes it to that next level with that skills assessment, and ensuring that as we do this skills assessment, we continue to measure how they progress over time. This is something that can be be left behind, so that on a quarterly basis, you continue to work with your end users to assess what they're doing and how they're doing it. From a features perspective, the target audience is very similar to the level 3 training, but we are taking it to really that, I would say, even a more detailed and focused level of training. It is going down to that nth level of detail, if you want to look at it from that perspective, particularly from a super user view. And coming out of it, there is that that continued assessment and the testing, both before and after. We have discovered one of the key ways to measure success is when we come in and do an assessment, and some organizations have opted to do a level 1 training and an add-on of an exam, so we proctor the exam. And then as the project has evolved, they have opted later on to come back and do a level 4 training, where we are then going in and really providing that detailed training around business process, day in the life, bringing in your terminology, and we are assessing and providing exams to the end users once again. So it's a very good way to determine at level 1, when we did the initial trainings, that the end users could understand key concepts for an RFP response, what those scores were versus a level 4. It provides a very good continuous feedback loop, and we can use that to continue to build out how training needs to improve and grow with additional add-on applications that may be coming down the road as part of the implementation roadmap. With this particular training, because it is the highest level of training, as you can note, 32 hours typically per module per resource, and the lengthiest amount of time to actually implement. 4 weeks in total to do the content development, 2 weeks to do delivery, and then by the time the overall exam and assessment is done and the post-audit results are completed, and we wrap up, it's a full 11 weeks to complete a level 4 training approach. Now, I have spoken briefly about some of the additional add-ons which would potentially lengthen overall implementation time associated with any of these training initiatives. There are options around creating a static training database. This database could be created using your data elements. There are also options for creating exercises, handouts. So all of these are things that can be built on as part of an overall training initiative. Likewise, customized job aids or handouts can be created. I like to think of the job aids as the cheat sheets. So in some organizations I've been with, we have created 2 or 3 page laminated job aids, which are available in everyone's cube in office, and it really helps them guide them through their day-to-day work activities, or refreshes them about a particular business process. In this, for any type of training add-on, usually there's roughly an additional 40 hours of work required per module per resource. So it's important that as an organization, if you feel that from a training perspective, you want very specific training environment with your data, with a database that can be left behind, that needs to be considered more quickly up front, so that can be built into the overall timeline and the work effort needed to get this done. All right, so moving on to the next slide here. As we've previously discussed, the accelerating organization performance methodology is really a key focus of how Spinnaker goes about developing our training approach. So within this AOP, there are really 3 key phases. You have your phase 1, which you can summarize as a prep and assessment type phase, your phase 2, which you consider as a development and delivery phase, and a phase 3, which you can look at as an overall audit aspect. Focusing upon prepping and assessing the phase 1. This is where, from a key activities perspective, we're looking at ensuring that your company strategy and goals are aligned. And as such, we are looking at overall metrics and performance objectives and ensuring that there is alignment of the goals and metrics associated with these performance objectives. As part of phase one as well, we are also looking at it from a competency perspective and how do we align metrics back to the process models. So there are many organizations when implementing a new process or a new application do not necessarily review or refine their metrics, and as such they are measuring the wrong thing when it comes to any new business process models that they have developed for this new implementation. And then lastly, as part of the prep and assessment, we are looking through from a skills view, what does it mean from a manager, when a manager assesses the skills of his or her organization? What does it mean from a self-assessment? How do I rank myself within this particular application or this particular process? How do my peers view me? And then there can also be surveys that are sent out throughout the organization to get feedback that way. All of this helps drive the overall development of a gap analysis, and then this gap analysis that from a prep and assessment perspective can then help us determine what your overall training needs are. Is it a small initiative, a medium initiative, or a large initiative? If we then move on to the develop and delivery of the actual training materials. So phase one is really about figuring out what we need and where those gaps may exist, and then taking what we figured out what we need and where those gaps are and putting that action plan in place and moving towards the development of that of those materials. So from an action plan perspective, it may mean working with organizations' HR groups to figure out how we realign individual plans, realign how KPIs for individuals are created, and in turn how they're measured based upon the new application or systems being implemented. And then if we move on to the execution perspective, it really then begins, what type of materials are we going to develop? Do we want to develop a curricula where we have 10 different training courses and folks that fall into this group get these 3 courses and individuals that fall into another group get these 5 courses and only super users get all 10 courses? So it's figuring out, what does that approach look like? Is it an on-demand approach? Are we going to put this on some type of learning management software application if your organization has that, where people can go and self-teach, so to speak? So these are all different aspects that are going on as part of execution, and then ultimately wrapping up with that overall certification. The last part being, of course, the audit phase. So how did we do? Are there gaps that still exist? And if there are, how do we go back and address those gaps? From if we were to look at this from taking those 3 phases and really breaking it down into an assess, design, implement, and manage approach, the training documentation and the training library that Spinnaker develops is really dependent upon which level of training is selected, of course, level 1 through level 4. And all of the materials that are developed are contingent upon, on your left-hand side, what is any type of process documentation that exists. So business processes, solution objects, business scenarios. As we move through the continuum of overall development, so we figure out what that approach is, we begin to develop the appropriate prototypes and templates. We start looking at the courses and the content of the courses. So we're developing outlines of those courses, getting buy-in and feedback as to the outline of the course, and then moving that on to where we actually develop the end user courses and we execute on the training associated with those end users. Now, a key step which many organizations tend to forget about and skip, and I've mentioned it a few times here, is the curriculum. What does your curriculum look like? It is important that you assess all roles within your organization that you think may be impacted by the solution and determine that based upon individual roles or groups of roles, that drives which curricula they may get. So again, as another example with another very large implementation I previously done, in the end, on the demand side, we had 13 different courses, and on the fulfillment side, there were 17 different courses. Those 13 courses in demand were then broken up into 10 different curricula. Merchants got curricula 1, demand planners got curricula 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Super users in demand planning got curricula 1 through 13. So that's just to give you an example. Depending on the roles or the skill sets of the individuals within the organization, that will drive which courses they should get. So all courses developed ultimately should roll into some type of curricula if it is a complex enough program. And then ultimately the output from this, once we go through the manage and we've cut over and go live, is if your organization has opted for it, that customized database and the incorporation of any materials developed into any type of learning management system or learning warehouse which your organization may have. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the next few slides because this really goes into some of the key deliverables and some of the activities associated with each phase. So as you can see here, as I previously discussed, the startup being around project prep and assessment. As you will know, typical project deliverables being around a kickoff, developing that capabilities and competency model, and the associated skills assessment and gap analysis. When we're moving into that training development and delivery, what does that action plan look like? What is the timeline for developing the materials? What are the training packages or the training courses that we will be delivering? And then actual execution or delivery of the training materials. And then the last component being around the audit and the wrap-up. Now, again, depending on the work that is being done, D6 and D7 there, for instance, from a delivery perspective, can be spelled out more detail, where we specify there will be 3 courses in demand, 3 in fulfillment, 1 in order optimization, whatever the case may be. If we were to look at it differently from an activity perspective, you can see that from strategy and goal alignment all the way through to that audit, we are, again, it's just flipping the pyramid around, so to speak, to look at the deliverables slightly differently. So if we're in that content development, are we doing custom manuals? Are there instructor-led manuals? Because there will be instructor-led courses. Are there, for instance, in other work that I've done previously, there were materials that were developed for the end users, there were materials that were developed for the instructors, and there was a third set of materials which was all PowerPoint-based because the first 2 were all Word-based. So these are the types of questions or thoughts that as an organization, depending on the type of level of detail you want to go to with training, determines what that content may look like. Now that we have moved through Spinnakers training approach, the level 1 through 4 training, the key output from all of this is ensuring that your organization is enabled, or it has the knowledge transfer in place to ensure that you are continuously improving. This is an area that generally, when many consulting organizations walk away, knowledge transfer has not been completed. So as part of organizational enablement, Spinnaker is all about ensuring that from knowledge objects, we are ensuring that the right objects are out there, they are communicated to the right individuals, the right groups, that in turn we select the right enablers. So does that mean, as part of the organizational and alignment and readiness webinar, if you've listened to that, as well as the org design, we talked about a change agent network. So are there change agents that could be identified as select enablers that are used to continue the training approach and to do follow-up work after cutover and go live to ensure that any issues or risks that are coming out are being percolated up to the continuous status meetings, and in turn being incorporated into updating the training materials as they need to be updated. Likewise, identifying the supporting metrics and measuring what that outcome is. Really, OE is about not stopping once we have stood in front of the room and delivered the training. It is about ensuring that we are sitting down with super users and users, ensuring that from that training they are well versed. So it is ensuring that when you move to that cutover and moving into hypercare, that there is that 1 week, 2 week, 4 week, whatever that window is, where Spinnaker is still engaged to ensure that your organization is enabled and understands what is going on and what has been delivered from a training perspective. So with that, that brings us to the end of a discussion around Spinnaker's approach to training and organizational enablement. For those of you that have already listened, the initial webinar focused upon Spinnaker's change management framework, which was followed by alignment and readiness and design, and then today training and organizational enablement. Up next, there will be a webinar on communication and the importance that communication plays within the overall environment, because without communication, it doesn't matter how well your organization is aligned. It does not matter how well you have trained or conducted knowledge transfer throughout your organization. If communication is not sound and key, you may not be successful with your overall implementation. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for listening today. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Spinnaker, and we will be more than happy to help. Thank you very much.